The heat shimmers off the asphalt, a mirage of a better road just out of reach. But for Elijah, the stalled limousine, its silver hood agape like a surprised mouth, is just another problem needing a steady hand and a calm mind. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. He'd seen his share of breakdowns, human and mechanical, in his 52 years, each one a puzzle to be patiently coaxed back to life. This stretch of Nevada highway, baking under the relentless afternoon sun, was an unforgiving place for any machine to surrender, especially one as ostentatiously out of place as this gleaming symbol of wealth. For Elijah, whose own garage, Elijah's Auto and Heart, sat nestled in a quieter, more modest part of Las Vegas, this was an unexpected detour, yet one his nature wouldn't let him ignore. The weight of unspoken history, of dreams deferred and talents quietly honed in the shadows, settled on his shoulders as comfortably as his grease-stained work shirt. He pulled his reliable, if somewhat battered, pickup truck onto the shoulder, the crunch of gravel a familiar sound. He expected a brief exchange, a quick fix, perhaps a grateful handshake or a folded bill pressed into his palm, gestures he'd received countless times. He never expected this particular interruption to become a hinge upon which his entire life might pivot. What happened next would change everything. Elijah Washington was a man built of resilient parts, much like the engines he so intimately understood. His youth had been filled with the whir of gears and the scent of oil, a fascination with how things worked, how they could be made better. He'd devoured schematics like novels, his mind racing with designs for more efficient engines, more intuitive systems. He'd dreamed of engineering, of lecture halls and laboratories, of seeing his innovations transform the automotive world. But the late 1980s and early 90s had different plans for a bright young black man from a working-class background, no matter how brilliant his designs or how fervent his ambition. Doors had remained stubbornly closed, opportunities whispered to others, his portfolio of ideas met with polite but firm dismissals, often without a second glance beyond the cover page. One particular memory, sharp as a shard of glass, involved a dismissive university professor, Dr. Alastair Caldwell, who had glanced at Elijah's painstakingly drafted engine modifications, sniffed, and handed them back, remarking that perhaps practical application in a local garage was more suited to his aptitude. The sting of that condescension had never fully faded, merely dulled by the years and the necessity of earning a living. So, Elijah had channeled his genius into the tangible, into the immediate needs of his community, becoming the go-to mechanic, the man who could breathe life into the most stubborn of machines. His garage wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary of solutions, a place where trust was built with every turn of the wrench. His daughter, Sarah, now in her second year of an engineering program at UNLV, was the repository of his deferred dreams. He poured every spare dollar, every ounce of encouragement, into her future, determined she would face fewer closed doors than he had. Their nightly phone calls were a blend of her excited updates on fluid dynamics and his quiet, proud questions, a testament to their unbreakable bond. He often thought of Caldwell, now a renowned consultant often quoted in industry journals, a symbol of the systemic disregard that had shaped his own path. It was a faint, bitter taste, an old engine knock he couldn't quite tune out. The neighborhood knew Elijah's skill was extraordinary. Mrs. Henderson still talked about how he jury-rigged her ancient station wagon's air conditioning with a repurposed component from a refrigerator, a fix that lasted another 5 years, baffling a dealership mechanic who later saw it. This was Elijah, quiet brilliance, hidden in plain sight. The call had come as he was closing up, Sarah on the line detailing a challenging thermodynamics problem. He'd been heading home, the desert sky beginning to blush with the approaching sunset, when he saw it, the limousine, inert and conspicuous against the vast, empty landscape, its driver, a man in a crisp black suit, pacing frantically beside it, phone pressed to his ear, gesticulating wildly. Elijah felt that familiar pull, the ingrained instinct to help. He could have driven on, it wasn't his problem. But the image of the stranded vehicle, the driver's obvious distress, resonated with a deeper part of him, the part that couldn't abide unsolved problems or people left helpless. He signaled, pulled over, and approached. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice calm and even. The driver, whose name tag read Thompson, whirled around, his face a mask of frustration and barely concealed panic. "Trouble? The blasted thing just died. Dead as a doornail. And Mr. Sterling is not going to be pleased. Not pleased at all. We have a flight to catch." Thompson eyed Elijah's dusty truck and work clothes with a skepticism that bordered on disdain. I've called for a corporate transport, but they said it could be an hour. An hour? Elijah merely nodded, his gaze already on the limousine's engine bay, the steam still faintly rising. Mind if I take a look? Might be something simple. Thompson scoffed. Simple? This is a Gen 7 Maybach hybrid. It's got more computing power than the first moon landing. It's not simple. Elijah ignored the jab, his years of experience teaching him that panic and pride were often the loudest voices in a crisis, but rarely the most useful. Could be a sensor misreading or a fuel pump relay. Happens even to the best of them. He reached for the hood latch, his movements economical and sure. Thompson hesitated, then grumbled, Fine. But don't make it worse. This car costs more than your house. Elijah didn't flinch. He'd heard variations of that sentiment before. It was the casual dismissal that used to wound him. Now, it was just noise, like a misfiring cylinder he knew how to silence. With a soft click, the hood released, and Elijah propped it open, his eyes scanning the complex array of wires, hoses, and polished metal. The engine was indeed a marvel of modern engineering, a far cry from the carbureted V8s he'd cut his teeth on, but the principles remained the same. Fuel, air, spark, and increasingly, a labyrinth of electronics. Thompson hovered, muttering about schedules and important people. Elijah tuned him out, his focus narrowing. He ran his hands lightly over components, feeling for unusual heat, checking connections. His senses were his primary diagnostic tools, refined by decades of experience. He didn't have the proprietary diagnostic tablet that a dealership would plug in, but he had something more fundamental, an intuitive understanding of mechanical and electrical systems. He spotted it then, a slight discoloration on a small, almost hidden control module near the firewall, a telltale sign of overheating. And next to it, a wire whose insulation seemed slightly frayed, almost imperceptibly so, where it passed close to a hot exhaust manifold shield. There, he murmured, more to himself than to Thompson. He suspected a cascade failure. The wire had likely shorted intermittently against the shield due to vibration and heat, confusing the primary ECU and sending the complex hybrid system into a protective shutdown. It was a subtle flaw, one that might not even register on a standard diagnostic scan, which would likely point to a dozen other phantom issues. He retrieved his worn leather tool roll from his truck. It didn't contain gleaming, chrome-plated instruments, but well-used tools, many of them modified by his own hands for specific, tricky jobs. He carefully rerouted the wire, then, using a specialized heat-shrink tubing and a small, butane-powered soldering iron he always carried, he meticulously repaired the insulation, ensuring a secure, heat-resistant seal. He then inspected the control module. It seemed physically intact, but he suspected the short might have temporarily scrambled its logic. On a hunch, remembering similar issues with much older, simpler systems, he performed a hard reset by disconnecting the main battery for a precise 60 seconds, allowing all volatile memory in the various ECUs to clear. Thompson watched, arms crossed, his skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging curiosity as Elijah worked with a quiet, focused intensity. You really think that'll do it? Thompson asked, his tone a fraction less arrogant. Sometimes the most complex problems have the simplest roots, Elijah replied, reattaching the battery terminal. Or the most overlooked. He closed the hood. Try it now. Thompson slid into the driver's seat, his hand hesitating over the start button. He pressed it. The dashboard lit up, system checks flashed green, and then, with a smooth, powerful hum, the engine came to life, settling into a perfect, almost silent idle. Thompson stared at the console, then at Elijah, his mouth slightly agape. It was in that moment of stunned silence that the rear passenger door clicked open with an expensive, hydraulic sigh. A polished shoe appeared, followed by a tailored trouser leg. Mr. Sterling, CEO of Sterling Automotive Innovations, one of the largest and most forward-thinking automotive technology companies in the world, stepped out, his expression impatient. Thompson, what in blazes is the delay? I have a keynote in Zurich I cannot be late for. He was a man accustomed to things working, to people moving at his pace. He barely registered Elijah, who stood quietly by his truck. Then his gaze fell on the open hood of his pickup, the tool roll, and the faint sheen of grease on Elijah's hands. Sterling turned to Thompson. Is the vehicle operational? Thompson, still slightly dazed, nodded. Yes, sir. This gentleman, he fixed it. Sterling's sharp eyes flicked to Elijah, a flicker of surprise, Perhaps a touch of annoyance at the unscheduled interruption to his meticulously planned life. Fixed it? One of my flagship vehicles? What was the issue? Before Thompson could offer a layman's guess, Elijah spoke, his voice even and clear. It appeared to be an intermittent short in the loom supplying the secondary power control module, sir. Likely due to proximity to a heat source causing insulation breakdown. The resulting signal corruption probably initiated a system-wide failsafe. Sterling's eyebrows rose. This was not the explanation he'd expected from a roadside Samaritan. Indeed. And how did you deduce that without the Gen 7 diagnostic interface? Elijah met his gaze. Experience, sir. And sometimes, the old ways of looking at things can spot what the new ways are programmed to miss. I also noticed a potential design vulnerability in the routing of that particular harness. It's a bit too close to the manifold shield without adequate thermal protection for long-term durability under extreme temperature cycling, like you get out here in the desert. A silence fell, thick and charged. Sterling, a man whose company prided themselves on cutting-edge design and engineering, stared at the black mechanic in the dusty work shirt. The engineers back at headquarters, with all their simulations and degrees, had missed this? Or had it been flagged and dismissed as a low-probability occurrence? Thompson watched, holding his breath. This was uncharted territory. Elijah felt a strange calm. He had spoken his truth, the truth of his craft. There was no arrogance in it, only the quiet confidence of a man who knew his subject intimately. He remembered the countless nights he'd spent sketching, refining ideas for engine efficiency, for more robust systems, ideas that had never seen the light of day beyond the pages of his notebooks. Sterling broke the silence. Thompson, pay the man generously. And get his details. We need to get to the airport. He started to turn back to the limousine. Then he paused, something in Elijah's directness, in the quiet authority of his explanation, snagging his attention. He turned back fully. You said design vulnerability. Explain. And so, on the side of a sun-baked highway, with the vast expanse of the desert as their unlikely conference room, Elijah Washington, a man whose genius had been relegated to the shadows for decades, found himself explaining the nuances of thermal dynamics and wiring harness integrity to one of the most powerful men in the automotive industry. He spoke of preventative design, of the practical wisdom gained from seeing how components failed in the real world, not just in simulations. Sterling listened, truly listened, his initial impatience replaced by a focused intensity. He asked sharp, probing questions, and Elijah answered each one with clarity and precision, years of suppressed knowledge bubbling to the surface. When Elijah finished, Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, minimalist business card. Elijah. Washington, is it? Elijah nodded. My company is currently wrestling with a persistent thermal management issue in our new EV powertrain. My engineers are stumped. Your observations, they're pertinent. He handed the card to Elijah. Call my office. Ask for me directly. I believe we have more to discuss than roadside repairs. The highway, which moments before had been a strip of hot asphalt leading from one mundane day to the next, now shimmered with an entirely different kind of possibility. Back in the quiet solitude of his small home, the expensive, linen-textured card felt alien in Elijah's calloused hand. Arthur Sterling, CEO, Sterling Automotive Innovations. He sat at his worn kitchen table, the scent of Sarah's forgotten coffee cup still faint in the air. Doubt, a familiar companion, began to whisper. This was a world away from his garage, from the comfortable predictability of his life. What could he, a neighborhood mechanic, possibly offer a titan of industry? He nearly tossed the card aside. But then he thought of Sarah, her bright, hopeful face, her unwavering belief in him. He thought of all the years his own spark had been dampened by indifference and systemic barriers. He went to his old roll-top desk, a relic from his grandfather, and pulled out a dusty portfolio. Inside were sketches, notes, calculations, designs for advanced cooling systems, ideas for more efficient energy recapture, concepts he developed years ago, born from the same deep understanding that had allowed him to diagnose Sterling's limousine. One set of drawings, in particular, caught his eye. It was a novel approach to heat dissipation in high-density power units, an idea he had when working on an old, chronically overheating generator for the local community center. An idea Dr. Caldwell had once glanced at during a brief, disastrous attempt by Elijah to audit one of his advanced engineering seminars, only to dismiss it as theoretically unsound and practically irrelevant for modern applications. Elijah's heart began to beat faster. Sterling had mentioned a thermal management issue in their new EV powertrain. Could it be? He spent the next 2 days immersed. He researched Sterling Automotive's latest EV platform, cross-referencing it with his old designs. The parallels were uncanny. The problems Sterling's team were likely facing mirrored the exact challenges his own, decade-old innovative cooling system was designed to solve. This wasn't just a lucky break. It was a convergence, a lifetime of quiet work meeting a moment of opportunity. The game changer wasn't just Sterling's card. It was the realization that his old, dismissed ideas might hold the key to a cutting-edge problem. Sarah, home for the weekend, found him surrounded by papers, an almost forgotten light in his eyes. "Dad? What's all this?" He explained, his voice hesitant at first, then gaining strength as he laid out his theories. Her excitement was infectious. "Dad, this is amazing. You have to call him. This is your chance." Sterling had mentioned a critical internal review of the EV project scheduled for the following week. The deadline was tight. With Sarah's encouragement, Elijah refined his old schematics, adding notes based on his recent research, translating his practical insights into the language of corporate engineering. He called Sterling's direct line, bypassing the layers of gatekeepers. Sterling himself answered, his voice surprised, then intrigued when Elijah briefly outlined his potential solution related to the EV thermal problem. "Washington, I was wondering if I'd hear from you. What you're suggesting, it's unorthodox. But given what you did with my car, come in on Wednesday, 10 a.m. Be prepared to defend your ideas." The line clicked off. Elijah looked at Sarah, a slow smile spreading across his face. The ramp-up to the showdown had begun. The Sterling Automotive Innovations headquarters was a gleaming monument of glass and steel, a world away from the familiar scent of grease and solvent in Elijah's garage. He wore his best shirt, newly pressed, and carried his updated portfolio. As he was escorted to a large, intimidatingly sleek boardroom, he saw a familiar, unwelcome face among the group of engineers and executives already assembled. Dr. Alistair Caldwell, looking older but no less dismissive. Now clearly a high-paid consultant for Sterling. Caldwell's eyes flicked over Elijah, a brief, uncomprehending frown, before dismissing him as an assistant or a junior staffer. The irony was not lost on Elijah, a quiet pulse of his old hurt, but also a new resolve. Sterling entered, all business. "Gentlemen, this is Elijah Washington. He believes he has an insight into our Project Chimera Thermal Regulation Challenge." Heads turned. There were polite murmurs, a few skeptical glances. Caldwell finally recognized him, his expression shifting from indifference to outright disbelief, then a sneer of contempt he barely bothered to hide. The air thickened. Elijah felt a tremor of nerves, the old anxieties stirring. But then he looked at his hands, hands that had coaxed life back into countless machines, hands that understood the language of metal and current. He thought of Sarah's belief in him. He was not here seeking validation from men like Caldwell. He was here to share what he knew. He began, his voice steady, laying out his analysis of the Chimera project's likely thermal choke points, then unveiling his proposed cooling system, a biomimetic design inspired by the circulatory systems of desert animals, combined with a unique microchannel fluid dynamics approach he'd theorized years ago. He used clear, concise language, his practical experience lending weight to his innovative theory. The engineers began to lean forward, intrigued despite themselves. Questions came, sharp and technical. Elijah answered them calmly, referencing his schematics, explaining the real-world applications he'd observed that supported his concepts. Then Caldwell spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mr. Washington, while your enthusiasm is admirable for an amateur, this biomimetic approach is hardly novel, and frankly, your understanding of advanced fluid dynamics seems rather rudimentary. These concepts have been explored and largely dismissed by serious researchers." It was the same old song, the same dismissal. But Elijah was no longer the young, intimidated student. He met Caldwell's gaze, his own steady and unyielding. "Dr. Caldwell," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the suddenly silent room. "With all due respect, practical application often reveals truths that pure theory overlooks. My system isn't just about mimicking nature. It's about an integrated approach to thermal transfer and energy recovery that addresses the specific load profiles of this powertrain. It mitigates the precise cascade failure points I suspect your current simulations are not fully accounting for, much like the subtle fault in Mr. Sterling's limousine." He then walked them through a specific scenario, a failure point in their current design that his system would elegantly solve, using the same principles that had allowed him to quickly diagnose the limousine. His clarity was irrefutable. He wasn't just presenting an idea. He was demonstrating a profound, holistic understanding. Caldwell sputtered, trying to interject, but Sterling raised a hand, silencing him. The CEO's eyes were fixed on Elijah, a look of dawning realization on his face. The moral victory was not in shaming Caldwell, but in the undeniable power of Elijah's intellect, honed not in elite labs, but in the crucible of real-world problem-solving. Remarkable, Sterling finally said, his voice cutting through the tension. Your approach, it's elegant. And it directly addresses the core issues we've been battling for months. He looked around the room. Mr. Washington has done more than just present an idea. He's shown us a new way to look at the problem. The faces of the other engineers reflected a grudging, then growing, respect. Caldwell sat defeated, his assertions deflated. Elijah Washington, the overlooked mechanic, had not just fixed a car. He had illuminated a path forward for an entire corporation, standing affirmed not by pedigree, but by brilliance. A profound quiet settled over the boardroom. Mr. Sterling rose, walked over to Elijah, and extended his hand. Elijah, he said, his voice carrying a new warmth, I believe you've not only potentially saved Project Chimera but have also reminded me that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. Thank you. The handshake was firm, a gesture of genuine respect, a world away from the perfunctory acknowledgments Elijah was used to. Sterling then announced, effective immediately, I'm creating a new special projects division, focused on practical innovation and cross-disciplinary solutions. Mr. Washington, I would be honored if you would consider leading it as our chief innovation scout. The offer hung in the air, not just a job, but a validation, a chance to bring his lifetime of insights to the forefront. Elijah felt a wave of emotion, a quiet catharsis washing over him. The years of being undervalued, of dreams kept on hold, seemed to recede. He thought of his little garage, of Sarah's bright future. Mr. Sterling, Elijah said, a rare, wide smile gracing his lips, I accept. There was a murmur of approval, even from some of the initially skeptical engineers. The path ahead would be challenging, but it was a path he had earned, a path he felt uniquely prepared to walk. Later that day, Elijah called Sarah. Guess what, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your old man's got a new kind of engine to work on. And this one might just change a few things. He could hear her joyful cry on the other end of the line. In his new, small but well-equipped office at Sterling Automotive, a photo of Sarah, beaming, already sat on his desk. He looked out the window, not at a dusty highway, but at the sprawling cityscape, a future he had once thought irrevocably lost, now reclaimed, piece by patient piece, like an engine rebuilt better than new. He gave a single, satisfied nod. The real ignition, he knew, had just begun. This is where the story concludes, focusing on the immediate emotional payoff and the symbolic shift in Elijah's life, bringing his journey of overlooked genius to a point of recognition and quiet triumph. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.